me, sir.
I do not aim at my hand. He who aims with his hand has forgotten the face of his father. I aim with my eye. I do not shoot with my hand. I shoot with my mind. Jake! I do not kill with my gun. I kill with my heart.
The Dark Tower is based off of the most famous book series of all time, written by the author Stephen King, a legendary author in my opinion, and stars Idris Elba as Roland Deschain and Matthew McConaughey as the Man in Black, as it follows a kid in New York who's having visions about the Dark Tower, the Man in Black, and the Gunslinger, and he dreams about this Dark Tower, and if it gets destroyed, Earth is pretty much in chaos. Going into this film, I was very skeptical of it. I've read reviews about it, I've watched reviews about it, some saying it's a bit okay, some saying it's the worst piece of garbage in the world, and while I do acknowledge both sides of the same coin on this one issue, I have to say I kind of enjoyed it, but it's not that good. See, going into this film, you don't really get a sense of what this world is, what this universe is like. The only things you get is that the Dark Tower cannot be destroyed. If it does, evil comes in, and that's it. There's nothing really much else to it other than that. So let's start off with the positives first. The positives I have with the film are very slim. First off, I like the kid actor who plays Jake. I think he does a pretty good job playing the role that he needed to be. He needed to be convincing in certain areas of expertise. He needed to be monotone sometimes. He needed to be scared. He needed to be joyful. He needed to be a wide range of emotions for his character, and he nails it. Roland Deschain, played by Idris Elba, is a pretty interesting character. There's a couple lines in this movie that get me thinking about who this version of Roland Deschain is, because let's be honest, the book version and the movie version are completely different types of people. You have the book version, who is kind of a racist, because, well, he's written that way. That's pretty much all I have to say about that. In this version, he's this cold-hearted type guy, which is true to the character, but there's other things that happen in the movie that I'm not really going to spoil, but Idris Elba does a really good job for his character. I think he's a pretty good actor in this movie. In fact, most of the actors in this movie act really well. You know, I mean, going by the Stephen King logic of most of his source material, you would think that they would have some sort of form of overacting in this film, but to be honest, there really isn't any, which is kind of a shame to break the tradition of over-the-top bad acting from a Stephen King property, but I found it okay. I found the acting really good. I found some of the Easter eggs were really good. Granted, they're kind of minimal with some of them. There's clever nods to some other source materials like Pennywise and The Shining, and at one point there's like this Saint Bernard that walks down the street, and I'm like, yep, that's Cujo. The Easter eggs are really good. The problems are with the rest of it. It seems like the story has so many interesting ideas that it feels like they just crammed all 7.5 books into one movie. Like, interesting plot points for all these movies, or from all these books, into one movie. And there's your problem right here. The Dark Tower is known for its epic scale. Its storyline is pretty much Stephen King's magnum opus, and it could be considered a Lord of the Rings type thing. Granted, not like Lord of the Rings itself. Don't get me wrong, not like Lord of the Rings itself, but it's comparative because the world that he creates in the Dark Tower universe is huge. Just huge. And you could do a lot of interesting stuff with it. The problem is that they contain this whole movie into one movie. This could have been a multi-film franchise, and you could just adapt book one and go from there. You don't need to be cramming in other concepts from the other books into one movie. You can just go one book at a time, kind of like the Harry Potter series. But, not exactly like the Harry Potter series, mind you, but make it creative and interesting. One thing that I found that was kind of bad about this film is the lack of visualization. King is known for his use of visual descriptors. He describes things with a very, very clear voice. And this film doesn't really represent that. There isn't a point in this movie where I felt like, the words were being interpreted in a very creative and visual way. Except for one scene, but that's about it. This movie turns out to be a fish out of water type story for both Jake and the gunslinger. Like, Jake goes to Midworld, and he basically, tries to learn a little bit more about Midworld and how the interdimensional travels work, and at one point they have to remember the number 1408, which is actually another clever nod that I found was kind of funny. Then once Roland gets to Earth, he has his own fish out of water stuff, and some of it is predictable. I will give you that. It is a bit predictable with some of the humor in this film. As far as the script goes, there's problems with the pacing. Every so often, it'll go fast, and then it will slow down just a bit, and then go fast, and then slow down a bit. Like, there's no rising tension in this movie. Going back to the actors a bit, I want to talk about Matthew McConaughey as the Man in Black. He relishes this role. This guy is creepy. Very, very creepy. However, the problem I have with Matthew McConaughey's Man in Black is that the Man in Black himself doesn't have any deeper motives. No ulterior motives, nothing. He's just the guy who's just antagonizing the hero, our main hero, and that's just all he does. He just antagonizes him, and that's it. There's no point. There's no point where he has like a deeper story. He's just the de facto villain, which is kind of upsetting to me, really. But I do have to admit, he was a little bit threatening to me. I mean, the fact that the movie had the balls to kill off Jake's parents, or stepdad and mom, is actually kind of a good thing, because the villain kind of pushes Jake, who has the shine, by the way. He has the shine, which is a reference to The Shining. Basically, he's pretty much forcing Jake to do actions that he normally wouldn't do. Which is a sign of a great villain, but it's not fully executed in the way that you would want it to. It also has a problem with the budget. The budget of this film is $60 million, and for a franchise like this, of a book franchise like The Dark Tower, it needed a little bit more money, and some rewrites in the script, because, again, I think you could theoretically do a good Dark Tower adaptation. It's just a matter of where the budget is put, how the script is written, and how it performs, and it doesn't perform like you would want it to, and it's a bit unfortunate. Although I did come out of the theater enjoying it, because I know it's not the greatest movie. In fact, it's not even a good movie. As I said before, there's a lot of pacing issues. There is some very garbage CGI in this, which you can tell because of the budget that's given on this. I don't know what it is with Sony projects, but they just seem to not give enough of a fuck about their projects, that they'll just put, random numbers on it. Sometimes you get Ghostbusters with $144 million and still look like garbage, but then you get, Spider-Man Homecoming, which was made for, $90 million or something like that, and it looked okay. But here you have The Dark Tower, and arguably like one of the best series of all time for Stephen King, and you couldn't come up with enough money to make it look visually interesting. You know, that's a big failure here. This film's kind of a mess. I don't know if fans will appreciate it, but for me, I don't think it's necessarily a great adaptation. It's not even a good adaptation by that standard. Because as I said before, they do like what Percy Jackson and the Olympians does, where they take things from other books and puts them into one movie, and doing that kind of treatment. And that's not what you should be doing with the material like The Dark Tower. But again, in the end, I enjoyed it. Why? Well, because the characters are likable, because of likable actors. You have a story that's not entirely convoluted, but it has a lot of problems with its world building, which isn't very enjoyable. The action sequences, while sparse, they're okay. However, the cinematography could have used a lot of work, because there's a lot of shaky cam, and I hate that whenever that happens in movies. You know, I love the references. You know, it's hard creating a new cinematic universe. Many people have theorized that there could legitimately be a Stephen King cinematic universe. And to start it off with The Dark Tower wouldn't be a bad idea, because that's where all of Stephen King's stories kind of lead. You know, all doors lead to that place, and you know, it's not a bad thing. But this film tries way too hard to try to convince you of that. Instead of trying to convince you of the story first, they just rather just kind of like throw shit together and say, "There's your movie," and it doesn't work. And in the end, it is a mess. It's a complete mess, and I enjoyed it. I will say that. I enjoyed the film, but it has its flaws, like deep flaws. How I would have changed The Dark Tower is get rid of the kid, as much as I liked him. Get rid of the kid, get rid of the comedy, get rid of, you know, Earth itself. Save that for the third movie, because in the third book, that's how Jake is introduced. Just adapt The Gunslinger. And make it longer. This film had the potential to be a good world-building type film, but it didn't have the runtime to do it. You know, it seemed like the filmmaker wasn't confident enough in the script, so he just ripped out a whole bunch of pages that could have been like a 45-minute or 100 or like an hour's worth of content that would have helped with the world building and to understand how this universe works. And it's just kind of haphazardly just thrown in there. But to sum it all up again, I enjoyed the film. It has a lot of problems. It's a mess. It is a bit paint by numbers, and I don't really know if I would suggest actually watching the film. It really depends on who you are. If you are a Stephen King fan who likes the books, I don't know if you would want to go see it. If you are an Idris Elba fan, you could go see it. You'll like him in this movie. But as a general audience member, I don't know if you would want to watch it either. Probably skip it, I don't know. So in the end, I'm going to give Stephen King's The Dark Tower a C-. Thank you guys so much for watching, and check back next week as I review not one, but 2 Stephen King movies in 1 week. And that should be interesting. So, until next time, I'll see you behind the camera. Peace.